justice and joy, O God. It's what we long for, it's what we hope for, it's what we labor for. Pour out your Spirit upon us, God, your Spirit of justice, your Spirit of joy. Lift up our hearts, extend our hands. May my words be faithful to you, O God. May all our hearts be open to the path that you are calling us to walk, following Christ our Lord. Amen. There's a phrase that's often used in the state of Maine to describe anyone who is not from there, from away. If any of us picked up and moved to Maine tomorrow, Pam and Greg Thielman, you would be considered from away. But you don't have to be from another state to be from away. Even Mainers who move county to county are considered from away. And if you haven't guessed it, from away is not a term of endearment. It's often used to describe people who are a little suspect, outsiders. People who come from somewhere to here, bringing their new ideas and different ways of doing things, people who are not like us. But over the last few decades in the old mill town of Lewiston, there is a large group of people who have come from very, very far away. From Somalia, in fact. And that's because in the late 1980s, a civil war broke out in Somalia, and the Bantu people, an ethnic minority, became the target of genocide. Hundreds of thousands of people fled to the border of Kenya. And in 1999, 12,000 Somali Bantu refugees were granted asylum, in the largest resettlement of African refugees ever in the United States. Initially, they were scattered across the country, mostly in cities, but urban life, many found, was not for them, because they originally come from a very rural area. So several Bantu families left Portland to move to the city of Lewiston, finding that it felt a bit more like home. Word started to spread that this community was a good place to live. It was quiet, it was relatively walkable, and it could accommodate large families. And in a very short period of time, this very small, very white community suddenly became about 20% Black. Today, 7,000 of the 36,000 people who live in Lewiston, Maine, are Somali immigrants. This town that was once dying is now filled with life because of people who came from away. People who speak a different language, have a different religion and culture and customs from the people who lived there for generations. But they did have one thing in common with these longtime Mainers. Many of them were farmers. Muhyiddin Liba is a Somali farmer and founder of the Somali Bantu Community Association. And when he came to Lewiston, he started looking for some land that he and his fellow farmers could cultivate to start a cooperative farm. Initially, they found no one who was willing to work with them. He said, you show up and they show you around. They say, this is a piece of land, is it okay? And we said, yeah, and we got excited and we set up the next steps to call. But then when you call, the person has changed. They don't want to hear you. They don't want a phone call from you. And sometimes they threaten to sue if you call again. Muhyiddin was too polite to call this racism, but certainly seems to be the case. Because you see, as the refugee population grew in Maine, some politicians used this as an opportunity to stoke racial resentment. to make immigration into a cultural wedge issue, to turn this white, largely working class state against things like welfare and government assistance, because it was going to go to those people who are from away. And it worked. Some of the longtime Mainers who were interviewed on Heather McGee's podcast, The Sum of Us, talked about their misperception that Somali immigrants are taking opportunities and resources away from the real Americans. They're taking our people's jobs. They're taking over everything. They're even in the Congress, one man said. They're into our schools, and they get everything they want for nothing. There was even a rumor going around that Somali immigrants were being given free cars. This kind of racial animus directed towards immigrants is not unique to Maine. It's not anything new in this country, where it seems like every group of newcomers is treated as suspect, as not as hardworking or deserving as the groups of immigrants who have come before them. Perhaps this distrust of people who are from away are as old as human civilization itself. After all, just look at this parable this morning. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard. The kingdom of God, Jesus says, is like a landowner going out to find workers for his field. And the landowner goes to the marketplace to hire workers at dawn. He finds those who have come early, looking for work, and agrees to pay them the daily wage. For whatever reason, though, the landowner keeps going back to the marketplace hour after hour to get more laborers. Maybe there's too much work for this small group that he first hires. Maybe they're too slow. Maybe the landowner sees himself as a job creator, and he wants to give this opportunity to as many people as possible. But for whatever reason, he keeps going back to the Home Depot parking lot, to the marketplace, 4 more times throughout the day, and each time brings a new crew of laborers to his field. And then at the end of the day, when it's time for everyone to get paid, he calls those who came last and starts doling out the wages. And those who were hired first are upset because the latecomers are paid the exact same amount. Now, the landowner paid those people who came early in the morning exactly what they agreed to work for. But they expected, since those who had only worked 1 hour had gotten paid the whole daily wage, that they would be treated differently. And we, like those workers who were out in the sun all day, we struggle with this parable because it is not fair. And this is the reason why workers organize, so that landowners won't be able to have power to abuse workers in this way, right? But you see, the workers' complaints are not just about wages. You have made them equal to us, they say. They don't want to form a union with these lazy latecomers. They don't want solidarity. They want to be paid more than the landowner agreed to, because they believe that they are entitled. They have been here longer. They are more deserving, and they want the landowner to recognize that and to reward them accordingly. When we were talking about this parable in our Thursday night group on Zoom, some folks pointed out that it's not necessarily the landlord who is being unfair, that the system itself is unjust. Sure, we know that the laborers who got there first in the morning got up early, probably before dawn, to be out there in the marketplace when the landowner came to gather his crew of workers for the day. But what if the ones who came a little bit later got there because they had to travel many miles by bus? What if they had to walk? What if they had to figure out childcare before they could go out and look for work for the day? And even though they came later in the day, those people still needed to put food on the table for their families. And you see, this isn't a parable about fairness at all. It's a parable about God's generosity. It's about a vision of the kingdom where every person is equal in the eyes of God. And every person is given what they need to survive. A kingdom of abundance where people do not have to struggle with one another in competition for their daily bread. A kingdom where we all recognize that our ability to thrive is deeply connected with the well-being of all our neighbors, whether they've been here for generations or just a short period of time. Because it's the sum of us that is greater than any of us are alone. You know, contrary to people's perception that the Somali refugees were a drain on the society, that they were only taking and giving nothing, the refugees were actually helping to turn around a state and an economy that was in steep decline. Before the refugees came, Lewiston's population was dwindling, but with the influx of these newcomers from away, they reversed a population trend that had been going on for 30 years. The African refugees spurred a dramatic turnaround in Lewiston's economy. In 2018, a bipartisan think tank calculated that Maine's African immigrant households contributed $194 million to the state's coffers. Long vacant apartments were now filled with families. Lewiston's main thoroughfare was lined with Somali-owned shops and restaurants. Lewiston was one of the only cities in the state building new schools. After 6 years of searching for a piece of land to farm, Muhaddin Liba, facing rejection after rejection, one day got a call from a man named Jim Hanna. Jim was just a regular guy, but he was on a spiritual mission to connect people through food. He wanted to support the Somali farmers and to help them find a piece of land where they could grow food for themselves and for others. And having a white ally in the room, Muhaddin finally got the lease on a piece of land. Just 2 acres. But the community knew what they wanted to plant first: Somali flint corn, the crop that their people had grown for generations. There was a farmer among them that had ferreted away some seeds in the luggage he had brought from the refugee camp in Kenya. And they planted them in the soil using the old way, with long sticks to poke holes in the soil, dropping in just a few precious seeds. He said, "It's a slow and sweaty job, but we like to do it that way because that's how we've been doing it forever." And they called their farming project Liberation Farms. Once the people in the state of Maine saw that these people were farming, they started to open up to them. And the Bantus were able to lease more land and start growing more crops like fennel and kale and tomatoes. And they started selling in the farmers markets and even got a commercial contract for their corn to a small business owner who made tortillas with it. But leasing the land proved unstable because after a year or two of cultivating the land, landowners would end the lease. They would simply cash out for development because farmers in Maine have been swamped with big money and offers from developers and solar companies who are willing to pay thousands of dollars an acre more than it is worth as farmland. But then Muhaddin met the Hilliards, Charlie and Kathy. They had been dairy farmers in Maine for 3 generations, but they were getting squeezed between the low prices and the dairy companies were paying them for milk and the high cost of farming. No matter how much work they put in, it was a losing prospect. So they had decided to sell their farm. And as dedicated farmers, the Hilliards wanted to see their land remain as farmland, particularly organic farmland, as they had done it for generations. And so out of all the offers that they got, Charlie and Kathy seemed most interested in the Bantus, but not all their neighbors were happy with this idea. In fact, more than a few people approached Charlie and asked him not to sell to them. He said one neighbor in particular came over to his house to voice his concerns, and I said to him, "Would you rather look across your field and see Somalis out there hoeing corn, growing food and making a living? Or would you like to look at a trailer park or a solar farm? Would you rather have those same people have the ability to grow their food? Or would you rather have them in a welfare line somewhere? Because you're not going to have it both ways." And in the end, the Hilliards decided to sell their farm to the Bantus. And the Somalis formed an agrarian trust to raise the money. And it took just 6 months to raise enough money to purchase the land outright. And they formed a cooperative so that they could hold the land in trust and that everyone in the community could work and share in the land together and share in its profits. See, these people from away brought their old ways of doing things to this new place. And they brought new life. And they brought shared abundance to a whole community. And this is what Heather McGee calls solidarity dividend, where all of us prosper together. It might seem like this story is about a place that's really far away, about a community that's really different from our own. But I believe that here at Dumbarton, we have the opportunity to experience a solidarity dividend. When each of us comes together in this community, each of us brings what we have to contribute that is special and important and valued. Because all of us have different talents and experience and gifts and ideas. And it's true that some of us have been here for decades and some of us only a few years. Maybe this is your first time here today. But we all contribute with our presence, and our prayers, and our time, and our talent. There are a few people in this community who are able to make significant financial contributions, and others who make smaller gifts. But you see, it all adds up. All of us together is what helps to fund our mission and our ministry. This is a communal effort, and all of us benefit because the sum of us is greater than what any one of us can do alone. This is my last stewardship sermon. Which means it's Commitment Sunday, my friends. And so we are asking you today, if you haven't already, to make your financial pledge for the year to come. Please know that whatever you give, it will make a difference. And I want to thank all of those of you who have already made your pledge, and especially those who have been able to increase your pledge for next year. Thank you. Your gift will help sustain the mission and ministry of this congregation. Your giving will help extend the ministry of this church far beyond the purple doors of Georgetown, and to help all of us envision a world that looks a bit more like God's kingdom. A community that is not just for some, but for the sum of us. May it be so.
I'm Joe Friebel, and when Reverend Rachel called me yesterday to ask me to do the stewardship moment, I agreed. But I'm going to have to ask her forgiveness. It'll probably be more than a moment. You've seen me up here occasionally playing the bass with the guitar group, but I was originally a guitarist and have not played guitar very much in recent years. And when a guitar class came along at Prince George's Community College for, they call it SAGE, senior something education, I signed up. And the first song that we started learning was For What It's Worth, which some of you may remember from the 1960s. It was a song written by Stephen Stills when he was with Buffalo Springfield, and it was calling for peace after the Sunset Strip riots about a curfew in Los Angeles in 1966. So that intrigued me, and I looked up the definition because I thought I knew what it was, but you know, Merriam-Webster always say it better than you can yourself, and Merriam-Webster say it's used to say that one is not sure whether something one is about to say will be helpful or valued. So here I am, for what it's worth. But also, it struck me that that is an interesting double meaning that we should consider for what it's worth. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary, as you can see on the banner and all around the sanctuary and the church. But it's time to look to the future, not back 250 years. As Reverend Rachel said, we have done well so far in the stewardship campaign, but we are not there yet. We need people who have not yet pledged to pledge. And one of the things we asked this year is that for people who are pledging to try to increase their pledge by 5%. When you consider that, if you were pledging $200 a month, that would be $2,400. But 5% is only a $10 increase per month. So it doesn't, when you actually look at the absolute number, it doesn't seem that big. So I just wanted to ask each of you what things are worth to you. When you go to a restaurant and sit down and there's light and heat and food, you pay for it. You pay the bill. When you attend Dumbarton and have light and heat and a beautiful building that's maintained, someone has to pay for it. Is it worth it to you? When you attend the church services, listen to the beautiful music, benefit from Reverend Rachel's inspiring sermons, when you count this your spiritual home, when you revel in the inclusive nature of our church, what's it worth to you? When you're part of this beloved church community, when you share the joys, concerns, the anniversaries, the milestones that people talk about, what's it worth? When our church is a leader in social justice, both in the Methodist Church, advocating for LGBTQ rights, reconciling ministry, holding a part of our apportionment away from the church and giving it to pastors who are threatened by the church and under sanction, or outside social justice. The numerous charities that we support through the mission and outreach budget, homeless dinners, pop-up breakfasts, and many more. What's it worth to you? What is the Children's House, the Montessori School, Dumbarton Arts and Education, which really is Dumbarton Concert Series, in Inner City, Inner Child, much better names. What are those worth? What is it worth to have a place that's a safe haven for recovering addicts to come and meet daily with Alcoholics Anonymous? And what is it worth to have a wonderful production of Voices of Zion and a mission for the future to be anti-racist? So I want to offer another goal, not a financial goal, but a goal of 100% pledging. Regardless of what you give, join the community and give something. Pledge something. Indicate that what you experience with Dumbarton is worth something, is worth it to you. Matthew seems to be a popular gospel for today, so I just want to quote from Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where's your heart, and what is it worth to you?